Well, welcome to this meeting of the Planning Policy and Built Heritage Working Party. What a mouthful. Surely that can be short. Apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Martin Beattie, Councillor Harry Blathwaite, Councillor Andrew Brown, Councillor Victoria Holiday, Councillor Luke Patterson and Councillor Jeremy Punchard.
Thank you. Are there any public questions?
None received.
Okay, thank you. I'm looking for approval for the minutes of the 13th of November 2023. Does anybody have any comments on those minutes? Can I take it that you want to approve those minutes, and can I have a proposer and a seconder?
I'll propose them first.
Propose. There's three of you. John Toy proposing, Peter Fisher seconding. Okay, thank you. Are there any items of urgent business?
None received.
Okay, thank you very much. Number 5 on the agenda is the declaration of interest. Do any members present today have any interest in any of the items on the agenda?
I suppose I should say, Mr. Chairman, that I am a Wales Ward member.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Joe. Anybody else? No? Okay. So we get straight into item 6. Before we do that, can I just say a couple of things? Firstly, Ian, who's with us today, has now been appointed Acting Planning Policy Manager. Congratulations on that, Ian. And Ian and his colleague will be presenting the 2 issues today. Can I ask that you hold any questions until the officers have finished their presentation for the sake of continuity? I would appreciate that. Thank you. The first item on the agenda is the next item is the Wells Nexus C Neighbourhood Plan, which will be presented by Ian.
Thank you, Chair. I pressed the wrong button. That's a good start. That shows it's been a while. Yes, the report's on page 11. I think we've all been here before. The plan is in its final stages. It's been through referendum where there was a successful result. 58% of the electorate voted on it, and it was an 82.4% of those who voted were in favour on the day. So pretty clear steer. So the recommendation before us today is as I say, it's a formality. We should be making this plan as part of the development plan. And I hope you would support that. I can very briefly go through it. There's some notable policies in this neighbourhood plan. It's probably the most comprehensive neighbourhood plan to date in the district. We've worked well with the steering group and third-party consultants which they've appointed to help them with it. I won't shy away from it, there have been a few tensions between us and them as we work through the wording of some of the policies. But as with all neighbourhood plans, I think there's an ambition on one side and there's our practical planning advice on the other. We have to meet in the middle and align it with our policies. The inspector's report was a very good report, and he went with the majority of our comments on those, and we managed to resolve a lot of the conflict that remained at the submission stage. But nevertheless, I'm talking it down. It's a very good plan, actually. It addresses their local issues quite significantly. So there is a principal residency policy. So that basically restricts the occupancy of the market housings to those with a local, well, sorry, not with a sole residency within the parish. That doesn't apply to our strategic allocations in the local plan, so it's any other growth. It's the first neighbourhood plan that actually has a allocated site in it. So they've allocated a site specifically for affordable housing within the, I'm going to say, I can't remember its name now, a large green site which is on the outside of 2 Furlong Hills, yes. So it's a section of that which was previously or is still open space, but it's now allocated for affordable housing. The intention is that the parish council bring that forward, sorry, the town council bring it forward through Community Land Trust, I believe. As they've got a vested interest in the land in the first place, they can control that. But it will be, so they will develop their own allocations policy along with that line, and allow, no doubt allow, be restricted to those with a local connection. They do have another policy in there that supports community land trust development. So that one is very similar to our exceptions housing policy that already exists, but it gives support for any community land trust development for affordable housing on the edges of the settlement boundary and related to the built area. So they're really pushing for housing for locals, if you like. There's a detailed character appraisal and design code that goes with the plan. So any future development must align to their characteristics, which are contained within that design code. And some other ones, they do identify some local green spaces. They were primarily already identified as open space by us, but the local green space is a higher level of protection, so it gives that sort of much clearer steer that you won't be able to, it's almost equivalent to green belt protection, so you won't be able to put any development on it, really. I say any, they've designated the allotments as local green space. Obviously you can still put some a greenhouse on it. Won't preclude its current use. There's 2 specific policy areas as well, so they've got a very specific policy for the harbour area and another policy around the beach area, sort of addressing car parking issues, development of the caravan park, and appropriate development around the harbour. And that's about it. There are other policies in there, but they're very similar to what we've seen before. I think they align pretty much with the emerging plan. And I'd very much like to recommend that take it forward to make it part of the development plan.
Thank you. Any points on this? Any questions?
No questions, but given that it's gone through all the process and is clearly in officer's view a very well structured plan, I'm quite happy to propose acceptance of the recommendations. Like this plan. Thank you.
Councillor Tilly.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for obviously the work that's gone into this, that to get it to this stage. I'm working with local residents and I'm sure the local members been involved with that as well. Can you just, for my understanding, because I sit on the development committee, obviously get the restrictions about principal residency, the design code for all development. So is that will affect the areas that we've allocated or only they're allocated?
It affects all proposals within the parish. So there is a design policy within the neighbourhood plan, which those posing proposals and officers determine it will have to have regard to. Okay. So you should see in any officer's report reference to the design character document and the design code of the neighbourhood plan in any determination.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, I just
Yeah.
want to understand that compared to the principal residency, which was sort of not affecting ours, but affecting theirs.
It's-
That was my understanding. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah.
But I'm also, I'm happy to second.
Thank you.
I would just add, obviously, that the plan, national policy has already given it weight in decision making as it reached the referendum stage. There's should be no controversy now in giving it significant weight in any decisions that come forward. And obviously that principal residency, I'm going to hint that there are applications already in the system where that would come into play. I think they are coming your way.
Councillor Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Given that this has been proposed and seconded, I'd just like to take the opportunity really to thank Wells Town Council and its working party chaired by Roger Argyle and his committee for getting this through and making such a good plan, and also Ian and his team for managing to sort this out with them. I know it's been fairly onerous. They're a very strong group. I also note that they started meeting before the pandemic and met through the pandemic with Zoom meetings and all sorts of things. So I think particular congratulations and thanks to us and them for getting it through.
Is that it for questions? Can I add my congratulations on this? I understand that this is such a well-worked plan that it may well be a template for further situations within the county, within the North Norfolk District Council. I mean, it does hit a number of very key issues, and clearly there's a lot of work's been gone into that, and I congratulate both Ian, his team, and Mr. Argyle and his team in arriving at this, what I understand is a very well-worked plan. Thank you.
Thank you. I would just add that the principal residency policy going forward, we will probably put that out as an example to all of the people who wish to do it and said, please, will you use this one as a template? Obviously, there's a monitoring implication for us, so we've got the wording right of how we can monitor it for them, and they don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's pretty much there now. So we would hope to standardise those policies going forward. That's not to say that there will be, because it's the neighbourhood plan group's decisions, but from a committee point of view, it's better to have a standardised policy. The wording is there. So.
Thank you very much. So for the minutes, Lauren, so this has been recommended, it's been proposed and seconded. You do that?
Yeah, correct. I just need a show of hands to say that that vote went through.
So
Thank you ever so much.
Thank you very much. We now move on to item 7, which is the North Walsham Development Brief. This will be presented by Ian's colleague, Matt Guttridge, who has worked on this extensively. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. So the aim of today is to seek members' endorsement on the final version of the North Walsham Development Brief. Since you last saw this document, much emphasis has been placed on its production by officers and the consortium through the EIP to help demonstrate timely delivery and hence its contribution to housing supply, as well as the tests of the local plan examination that happened in January, and to take account of feedback from the public, members and wider planning department. So you would have seen in the brief we attached to the report that its layout is now much simpler and flows from the concept through the policy requirements to the constraints and opportunities, and then sets out the high level principles that any development proposals will set out to meet around layout, connectivity, green infrastructure and overarching infrastructure requirements, as well as access. And it is considered that in this format, it now provides a good baseline from which any application can be judged against. So today is not for discussing the need for this brief or the key elements, requirements of the site, which are set out in the site-specific policy NW 62-A, included within the local plan, as these have been discussed extensively previously and gone through multiple periods of consultation, which we'll show in a bit, and has been formally endorsed by the council, submitted and undergone examination. The report before you details some of the changes and improvements to the brief, and we have prepared a few slides to first provide a brief recap and then a more detailed look at the final brief. It might be a little bit overkill considering there's only 6 of you, but it'll give you a good insight really. So next slide, please. Thank you. So what is a development brief in general? The development brief has been prepared by Bidwells in consultation with, oh no, I'm sorry, I've gone too far ahead. Sorry, ignore that. So this development brief has been prepared by Bidwells in consultation with North Norfolk District Council and members of the public. For those that don't know, Bidwells are the agents who are acting on behalf of the consortium of landowners who own the majority of the relevant parcels of land pertaining to this brief and who are supporting the site's inclusion in the local plan. They are also advancing a detailed plan application and working with officers on the next stage in the process, which is the production of the detailed design code, which I'll explain in a bit. This brief presents the outline, which will inform any subsequent plan application and also help guide in its determination. This final version of the brief is the end result of extensive work, which brings together the local plan site policy and vision. It sets out the high-level principles of development and helps inform any application in its subsequent determination. So this presentation will provide an overview of the final version of the brief and how it brings together the council's priorities, such as the catalyst for growth, the need for open space, connectivity and good quality design, as well as sustainable long-term development that reflects the ambition of climate resilient growth. The aim, as the chair has advised, is to seek endorsement of the brief at this time so as to use it in pre-application advice, as well as in the determination of the anticipated application later this year. So now we move on to what is a development brief. So a development brief is a document that can perform several functions. It can promote a site for development and identify the vision and key principles, interpret local plan policies, or address particular site constraints or opportunities. It is considered that this brief in particular performs all of these functions and is designed to help bridge the gap between the local plan and an upcoming plan application by outlining the strategic parameters for the development. Its production has allowed stakeholders and residents to influence the design of the development from the outset through consultations or direct engagement with those creating it, and most development briefs are adopted or endorsed by local authorities, or local authorities include plan policies that require their endorsement, which is the purpose of today. Next slide, please. So a brief history. So this slide sets out the progression of the development brief to date, which has been ongoing for quite a long time now. So December 2020, North Walsham West was originally a smaller series of sites that became amalgamated into a larger site led by a consortium and was identified in the draft local plan as an emerging allocation. June 2021, public consultation was held and hosted through the NNDC website, which identified the key principles for the development, such as the initial identification of the link road, and which included the concept master plan initially developed by ourselves. The feedback from this event helped inform the site-specific policy in the plan, and also the subsequent work when was then taken over by Bidwells. February 2022, with the council working alongside site promoters, we received the first draft of the development brief. And then within that sort of similar time frame, the local plan underwent its Regulation 19 consultation, which was a public consultation on the entire local plan, but not on the development brief. However, this was included within the representations to the consultation by Bidwells. So this consultation led to some minor changes to North Walsham's proposed allocation, which required some changes needed for the development brief as well. Moving forward, September 2023, second draft of the brief was produced and publicly consulted upon. They hosted 2 drop-in events in North Walsham, and the consultation allowed for input from specialist consultees. This result of this consultation was fed into further changes to the brief. December 2023, the policy team held an informal workshop with members of this working party on the latest version of the brief at this time and invited comments and feedback. which fed into other sources of feedback from the September consultation and resulted in another edition of the brief. So January, local plan began its public examination where all elements of the local plan were discussed in detail, including North Walsham West. And a third draft of the brief was submitted as evidence alongside a hearing statement from Bidwells. Through discussions with the planning inspector and hearing statements provided by the promoters of the site, further changes to the local plan policy might be required pending the inspector's approval, which may alter the brief further down the line. And then July this year, the council received a final version of the brief, which has been submitted to a working party for recommended approval today. Next slide, please. Thank you. So development brief content, the next few slides will provide an overarching exploration through the final brief. Next slide. Thank you. So chapters 1 to 6 of the brief. So chapters 1 to 5 introduces the brief and sets out the context within which the brief is being made. It also provides details on ownership and involvement in its creation and the national and local policy context within which the brief has been produced. Chapter 6 and 7, these chapters go into some detail regarding the site, its location and the wider area, its history, the existing situation on the site in regard to landscape, highways, access, movement, constraints, opportunities and uses. Importantly, it provides analysis of existing built form and has identified 3 different character areas, which are now called North, Central and South, all of which have differing types of existing character. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, these 2 images taken from the development brief. The figure on the left shows you how the brief looked at existing built form, and the brief goes into more detail on this, but it includes looking at different levels of density, design of existing houses, and the design and form of existing streets. The figure on the right represents how the brief has been divided into 3 character areas, which I've just mentioned and we'll explore in a bit. Next slide, please. So the key principles. So this brief, as expected of all briefs, introduces the key principles of this development. The groundwork for these principles has been established through the local plan and the site-specific policy, which outlines the requirements that this site must deliver on, some of which are represented on the map and are also explored through the review of opportunities and constraints in the early section of the brief. So some of these key principles include, next slide, please. Thank you. Sustainability and green infrastructure. So sustainability, this site is required by policy to create new areas of public open space and public uses such as allotments and sports pitches. The site is also required to provide landscaping to mitigate any potential impacts on the wider landscape and use these elements to help enhance biodiversity net gain. The site is landscape led. As just mentioned, the site is required to provide a substantial quantity of open space and a green infrastructure network, which includes a new town park and a comprehensive natural landscape buffering, especially to the south. The brief emphasises the use of low carbon and renewable energy technologies and measures to control over all environmental impacts, such as enhanced biodiversity, appropriate tree species, active cycling and footpath networks, and commits to the use of future home standards as required by local plan policy in its approach to carbon reduction and sustainable construction. Lovells is also, as well as developers on board, are committed to being carbon zero by 2030. And it is considered that the brief sets out a generous and positive approach in this key theme of the development. Next slide, please. So employment, the site is required to provide 7 hectares of new employment land to create new employment opportunities. These areas are located to the north within what is known as the Northern Character Area, but there is opportunity for some employment generating uses elsewhere on site, specifically the central area as well. Next slide, please. So community focus, the site is required to provide community infrastructure, which includes a new primary school, a local centre, which will include some additional employment generating opportunities and areas of public open space and play areas. The site also includes improvements to Weavers Way, which is to be retained and enhanced with the addition of several new footpaths through the site which connect to existing footpath networks. The site will also provide for self-build plots to be delivered throughout the development and is required to provide for elderly care, specifically 300 units or 200 dwellings equivalent worth as set out in the site-specific policy in the local plan. The image on the right is an indicative layout of the local centre, which is located in a central character area where the site is located and is the main hub of the site. Next slide, please. So access and movement. The site is required to provide a link road, which we have discussed and know all about now. The dashed blue line on the map on the right. Extensive work has gone through in this road's identification and mitigation of potential impacts, something like I said, we've spoken about working party previously, where detailed information was provided on some key elements of the link road. In addition to the link road, the site is providing new cycle and footpath linkages and new opportunities for public transport, including a bus interchange in the southern character area near to the Norwich Road access point. The brief details the multifunctional requirements for the separated provision of cycle footpaths and additional green space between the road and these uses in all character areas, which also acts as a swale and will house additional tree planting. Visualization examples of this are provided on page 81 of the report or 57 on the brief. Similarly, further details are provided around the bus linkages, bus stops, designs, and the interchange, so as to ensure a more integrated approach is taken towards access and transport options. Next slide, please. Right, oh, there's one, sorry. As mentioned earlier, development brief separates the site into 3 character areas, which we will quickly run through, as each provides a different focus on development, and these areas will be reflected in the design code, which I'll talk about in a bit. So next slide, please. Northern character area, this is where most of the employment will be focused, in addition to sports provision located within close proximity to the existing football club, residential development, open space, and play areas. Next slide, please. Central character area, this area of the site will be the main core of the site, with focus on several uses within this area that will interact with each other. The primary school is located opposite the local centre, with Weaver's Way to the south and a town park to the north of the local centre. It includes residential development and the provision of allotments, all of which is required by policy. Next slide, please. Southern character area, this area of the site is focused more on green infrastructure that surrounds this part of the site and intersects through the residential development. As mentioned before, transport hub bus interchange that consists of a turning option for buses is located near to the gateway into the site, and similarly to the other character areas, there will be plenty of footpath, cycle path connections throughout the site. This is the end of the sort of detailed information presented in the brief. The remaining parts of the brief add further context and seeks to outline how the requirements of the brief satisfy the policy compliance with the various requirements set out in the site-specific policy, which you can view on our website. The appendices to the brief include more detail on site context and analysis and provide previous iterations of the brief. Next slide, please. So what's next? Skip again. Sorry, next slide again. Thank you. So what's next? So within the development brief, there is reference to more detail being provided within the design code. So this design code is another document that looks at the site with more detail on design elements and key principles. The production of a design code is required by a site-specific policy for this site in the same manner as the brief, and will require approval by this council before the determination of an application. More specific detail will be included in the next stages of the design code, which will include specific detail on materials, key design elements, and the GI strategy. And throughout the brief, there are strong hooks linking these 2 documents together. Initial work on the design code has already begun, though no draft version has been submitted yet. We will go through a similar process of presenting the design code when received, and we'll invite feedback from this working party to help ensure this document includes all the necessary detail we need it to. As already mentioned, there is an expectation that an outline application will be submitted late summer, autumn time. And in addition to this, the site promoters are looking to potentially host an additional public event in North Walsham, the dates of which are yet to be confirmed. So that is it. Happy to take any questions if anybody has any. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Do we have any questions on Matt's presentation? Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. Surprisingly, perhaps, I think it's a very comprehensive and high quality brief. I've been following this for the best part of 7 years now. Had various inputs, as you know, and I think what we've ended up with is actually an excellent document. You know, I particularly like the 3 distinct village concept that's come through, the amount of open space, the amount of planting that's proposed, the fact that the houses are going to be as eco-friendly as possible, and energy efficient as possible. Will apply to every new build, and some of the private sector doesn't do that, unfortunately. So those are excellent, though. The link road, I know, seems to go over the railway, which gives us the option later on to try and extend that road into the industrial estate, which
Yes,
Many of us.
the option for that
Yeah.
remains.
as long as that
Just-
option is there. I mean, some members of the town council would want it to be put in straight away. We have to accept that that is not feasible at the present time, but we need the option to push for that in future years as the
Yes,
development grows.
that was a topic of conversation at the examination in public, and as a modification with the inspector that retains that element within the policy itself.
Yeah, that's excellent. I have to say, I've given the town councillors access to this, or at least referred them to go and read it. I've had no adverse comments back from either individual members of North Walsham Town Council or from the council itself. So I think we can assume that everybody's reasonably happy with it. I've got a few questions, if I may. Firstly, concerning our friends at Anglian Water. A lot of local comment relates to the water supply. You know, as you'll be aware, those water towers, well, they certainly existed when I was a lad, and that's a long time ago. And they were serving a town population of around 5,000 then. We're already 13,000 plus. We're going to increase it to 16.5, maybe 17,000 by the time all the developments are complete. Does Anglian Water have any plans that we're aware of to increase the delivery capacity?
I will say Anglian Water are fully supportive of this growth.
Yes,
So
but
been fully involved in its production of not just the brief itself, but the policy and the ambition of the council. I don't know about their investment strategy for supply of water. I'm afraid. I do know that there's the waste capacity in the investment required there, but on the supply side, I don't. But I do know they're obviously very keen to look at future supplies of water. One of the policies in the local plan obviously is a reduction in daily use of water. We evoke one of the prescribed standards. I can't remember what it is, 110 litres a day or something per person per day or something, which is lower than normal. I do know that Anglian Water themselves are pressing to lower that standard below that for future developments. And again, we discussed this at the examination hearing, and the inspector wouldn't go there. We were quite prepared to concede and say, yes, let's have a policy to have a lower usage in a person of water. But as it's not attributed to national standards, we cannot have a local standard because that doesn't accord with local policy. But I do know Anglian Water are lobbying for more restrictive water supply in development across the whole east, because it is a restrictive under stress area, and that includes all the way down to Cambridge and so forth.
yeah, I think following the King's speech, we'd like to see some action on that at a national level at some point. Which then brings me, we've got to deal with the fresh water, it's the foul drainage. Again, is the Marshgate works going to be expanded? How will it impact on the Gimming and pumping station, and hence pollution on Munsley Beach? You know, these are legitimate concerns, not just in the town, but in the wider area.
I'm just reading comments from Anglian Water here. It basically said their intentions to do an on-site pumping station, which connects to foul sewage upstream to the water sector. So the site will involve further investment from them. The policy itself requires the submission of a strategy to address foul and surface water. So we would get the more details within the actual proposal itself, which would obviously come to committee, but the policy itself requires them to provide that detail.
That's fine, thank you. Some minor points now. Any indication on how many self-build plots will be provided?
Their intention, or our intention, I should say, we have a policy in the local plan that requires, is it 5%? I think it's 5% of larger sites should provide self-build stroke custom build. So the brief does mention that the option for that wider custom build, if you like, will be presented. So it will depend on the uptake, really. So they'll be offering those plots if people wish to customize it. I think that is the way forward.
And in an earlier version of the brief, they did outline where they would like to see self-build located, but we weren't fully satisfied with the location. It wasn't in the best place, so we've had that removed. But the brief does say it'll spread self-build throughout the development. That is something that we would look at with the design code. We would very much like to see that identified, where exactly that would be located.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the care provision, it's necessarily, I think, a little bit vague, but it's unclear as to what they might actually be proposing. I mean, are we going to see bungalows designed around the needs of the elderly? Are we going to see extra care facilities? Are we going to see a care home on the site? Do you have any indication on those aspects?
There's quite a bit of flexibility around that. Again, this came up at the examination. The overall requirements, because the policy talks about units and how do you convert those units into dwellings. There was much discussion about that. So we've actually revised the policy to say it's approximately 200 dwellings is the equivalent. How and what type will depend upon the more specific proposal. At this stage, we're flexible. It could be individual bungalows, which of course will be classed as C3. It could be a care home, could be a nursing home. So all those details are usually provided by other people. So in the application comes forward, we have to be very careful that it still will allow that delivery of that mechanism. But we don't have the specific details, and nor do we wish to pin it down to a specific type at this stage. And again, the examiner, the local plan wouldn't go there if we chose, but we had the discussion.
I fully agree. We need to be flexible because we don't know how different types of demand will evolve over the next few
Yeah, and with
15 years plus.
And with the design code again, while we wouldn't want to, as Ian said, keep flexibility, but we would still like to see them identify rough locations of where they expect the elderly care to go, because the brief doesn't do that yet. So the design code is a good opportunity to really sort of pin that element down.
Thank you. Just as long as we avoid little elderly ghettos of clustering a whole load of little bungalows in one little area and remote from the rest. Now, those are getting older are part of the community as well. Needs to be kept in mind. A couple of bits on the open space areas. I mean, it indicates a possibility of a country park taken in Bryant's Heath and Hamptons Wood and all the rest of the areas. I'm not aware the consortium has actually owns. So presumably they're discussing that with ourselves and the county council.
Yeah, it was a bit of a confusion around the identification and the difference between the town park and the country park. The town park is located centrally. It's just north of the local centre. The country park, they initially called it a country park, but we requested that they perhaps dial that down a little bit into strategic green infrastructure. And that's located to that very southern strip along the southern border of the site. So in the latest version of the brief, shouldn't mention country park. We did ask them to erase that phrase and replace with strategic green infrastructure. If it is, then we might just need a quick revision. But yeah,
Yeah, it does want a little look at, because they mentioned Batton Woods in there, or correctly Witten Woods for those of us who grew up in the area, which is nowhere near the site at all, as you well know, it's the other side of Ebridge. I think that might want a little bit of judicious rewording around that. Final bit, yes, the school, no doubt that's been discussed with the county. It's obviously a good location for it. I don't see any mention of provision of any medical services within the site. And I'm aware that there is some work going on behind the scenes to provide a single large medical centre for North Walsham. And I presume that is taking higher precedence rather than allocating any land within this development, those sorts of services.
The policy doesn't, or the policy requirement doesn't require medical provision, but the brief does mention that there is that central area could be provided, such a facility could be provided within there, and as you say, that's a separate discussion. Similarly, it could fit on the edges of employment land or the town centre area. So it gets a mention and it's there.
Yeah, as you know, as soon as any development is mentioned, the first two words that are said by any objectors is doctors, dentists. So we need to be clear that can happen. So, yeah, thank you. Overall, I'm finding this very acceptable. I'm happy to propose we accept it. For your recommendations.
Councillor Toy.
Yeah, thank you. Most of about the quality and content of the report's been said by the local member, and I thank him for that, and for bringing all the local context to it. Can I just go back to the care policy requirement? Can you remind me on the wording on the care policy? Are we going to ask for care facilities, you know, that are fitted to requirements, not just we're going to build so many care places? We need to understand. So the same as we do, you know, what's the local connection with affordable housing? Are we going to and I understand that may feed in from across the district, but I'd just like to understand how the policy fits with that. Thank you.
The amended policy that's in front of the inspector at the moment clarifies that it's at least, or in addition, 200 dwellings equivalent of specialist elderly persons accommodation.
Right.
In practice, the housing team will work with the application to determine the actual type and need at the time. So the intention is that this development will happen over a significant length of time. I can't quite remember the trajectory that we have in the local plan, but it's certainly going on till 2040.
Yeah.
Kicking in roughly when it starts. 2027, 2028. So that's a long period of time in the different phases. So what they are proposing is that they look at the need as it arises and address that through, no doubt it'll be through reserve matters as the whole process evolves. But the original outline permission should be very much saying there. But the need is going to have to evolve.
Yeah, that was the thing to clarify.
Policy
We've got those processes in place.
Is quite strong, and we did fight for that at the examination because there was some pushback on the overall numbers. Is it included in the 1800? Is it in addition to the 1800? Is it required at all? So we stood our ground, and as I say, it's in front of the inspector.
In terms of the inspector, obviously you don't know what he's going to come out with, but was there in the discussions any indication? I mean, obviously we want we're happy with this, and I'm going to be seconding it as well, but is there indication that what's the likelihood, in your opinion, that there's going to be changes necessary of any significance?
I've got the next item on the agenda is a sort of local plan update, and I'll recap.
We'll cover that. That's fine. Happy to take that there. Yeah, I'd just like to understand. You know, just we obviously want to move things forward and not have to keep revisiting. So I'd like to get a feel for that. And finally, one just comment really. I grew up in Stevenage. Yeah, I'm prepared to confess to it, but as it was developing, and I remember the master plan and its development, and what was useful in that, and it turned out to be true, was long-term visualizations. They obviously did a lot of model building them times, but it's a very different place. I mean, we're talking 40 odd years later now, but even 20 years from when it's built, and you show it like you do now with trees and houses, but once that individualization of people comes along and there's a conservatory on and the trees have grown, it's a very different place. And I think that helps people to understand where it's going. So that's obviously down to Bidwell, so whoever's put in the thing, but I think they are useful for local context to get that acceptability and that understanding of where we're going, not where we are, and what it's going to look like when it's built and raw. So I'll just offer that as a suggestion for someone who's
Thank you,
experienced
Councillor
that.
Toy.
But I'm happy to second.
I think that's an important point, quite
Yeah.
frankly. My understanding, and I'm new to the area, I've only lived in the area for 5 years, that this plan will make North Walsham a very different place. And that different place will require different services. And I think it's important that they are reflected in the plan. Are you satisfied with the questions that Ian has given you, that we've got that adherence?
I'll answer that. I think I can answer that and say that yes, we understand, because we all sit on development committee and sat on this working party as well for a long while, that we understand that the restrictions of what we can put in, because a lot of that is done elsewhere and it has to have flexibility. So I think that the policy team historically delivered as strong as they can, but they're governed by national policies. So I think that's, we have to understand that. It's not where we would like to be. We would like to see some definite answers, because it's always the first question. But yeah, I think Councillor Heinrich would probably want to add to that as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, as I say, as somebody who's been involved for a number of years, you know, we've refined this through discussions locally, through the local consultations, through officers, particularly the work that Mark did on this, that we've got a very good outline scheme here. We know what's going to go where, what the landscape will look like. The detail will be in the applications for each individual unit of development. And you know, we'll pull those apart as the development committee as and when they come forward. And I'm sure those will be discussed with officers in some detail before they come forward anyway. You know,
Any other questions?
Things will evolve over the lifetime of this development. It's not something like the new development, proposed development up on top of Norwich Road, which is a single fixed thing. It didn't have a development brief. One assumes it will go ahead when our good friends have decided what they're going to do about affordable housing on it, but it's not a matter. And it will have to evolve, because the needs of the town will change as it expands. The expectations will change, the nature of population will change. So, you know, nothing is written in tablets of stone. This is a damn good guide, but it's not going to survive in absolute form, in my view, right through to 2040 and beyond. I mean, I think that'd be my problem, but there we go.
Thank you, Councillor Heinrich. Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On a point of levity, John, we won't hold your Stevenage heritage against you. My point really relates to what's said on page 21, and it's one of the items that came out of the feedback. So you've listed there the common themes from the public feedback, and the fourth bullet point down is that which relates to the transport and the site's impact on the local road network, in particular the B1151 and the impact on Coltishall and Orsted. I guess my first question is that a legitimate consideration for and within the scope of this development brief? And secondly, if it is, how is that reflected within the brief?
It's more a case of the policy requirement. So the brief looks at the site-specific area. It's widely acknowledged that off-site mitigation is required, and that is written into the policy. And again, I'm going to refer back to the examination in public, where there was a whole day on this site, and a very detailed discussion around the off-site mitigation requirements around the B 1150 and Coltishall. Various opinions were put forward, but the policy it sells. Obviously, the promoters have put forward mitigation proposals which demonstrate the deliverability of the site. So those specific proposals were discussed at the examination. So they're well documented. They're out there in the transport studies, but the actual local plan policy requires that these off-site mitigations are agreed and delivered as part of the application. And that's agreed with the Highways Authority, as well as obviously our own planning committee. So all I can say is it's not part of this on-site brief, but it is part of the overall local plan policy, which requires the off-site mitigation, and specifically the evidence highlights the Coltishall improvements, which I'm going to assume you're familiar with, in terms of what was being proposed earlier in the year and through the examination.
I think it's important to mention as well that to manage expectations, the design code will follow the brief in that it will focus on the site-specific detail and may not look at things like the impacts on Coltishall. But I know for a fact that Bidwells are already engaging with the Highways Authority already in regard to the outline application, and no doubt that'll be something that'll come up through the outline, that application process, even if it might be outside of the design code and development brief process, it will still be looked into. And they've already done extensive work already, which you all know about and have discussed previously, and it's been presented through examinations. They've done a lot of front work already, but that will no doubt be looked at again through the outline process.
If it provides any reassurance, I should say that one of the modifications with the inspector is that the mitigation measures required at Coltishall and Horsted will be delivered at the beginning of the scheme. So it's actually in the policy is what is in front of the inspector. So they need to be delivered first.
Respond, Mr. Chairman. I guess my concern is that in the broader sense, the success of this obviously will be measured over decades, because the delivery of it will be over that kind of timescale, I rather suspect. And if that particular problem or those particular problems, constraints within that area aren't appropriately addressed, then I think the success of it will be blighted by that. And we will be, to some extent, held responsible in part for not ensuring that there is very clear and deliverable linkage between this development and improving that route. And if we don't do that, whether we do it through this or some other mechanism of policy, I'm not precious about, but I am precious about it being addressed appropriately and delivered in a timely fashion. Thank you.
Well, I'm straying into the next item slightly, but
Yeah.
one of the key debates at the examination was the deliverability of this site. And when we talk about the deliverability of it, it's the overall financial deliverability, its commitment to off-site mitigation, what they are, and the inspector very much drilled down into what the evidence was required. I'm going to say he drilled down far more than we expected him to do so, and I would say required to do so for a local plan. So he really did look at those aspects of it and got the assurances, and we've got various statements of common ground now from highways and the promoters, all relating to the sort of off-site mitigation and the evidence. And he's obviously taken those away, and the word in which we put forward at the examination obviously is seeking the delivery of those in the early stages, which would cause betterment in the first instances in terms of traffic flow within them. And I believe, I can't quite remember the phrase, but at the end of delivery of the entire scheme, we would probably be back to where we start from, but there would be a betterment, but no worse of the overall delivery.
Thank you. Thank you, members. Are there any other further questions? Okay, thank you. Can I remind you on agenda item 7 on page 19, there is a specific recommendation. The recommendation, I won't read it out, but there are 2 points to it. The development brief is endorsed as a material consideration, A, and prior to cabinet authority to make further minor changes to the development brief is delegated to the acting planning policy manager. That's the recommendation. Thank you for your contribution. Do I have a proposer and a seconder against that specific recommendation? Proposed by Councillor Heinrich, seconded by Councillor Hoy. Thank you very much, Jeff.
And if I may just have a show of hands to confirm that recommendation is carried,
I forget about that bit.
and that's unanimous. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we now come on to item 8, which is a local plan update, which is going to be presented by Ian. Thank you.
Okay, I've prepared a short update. I'm quite happy for you to interrupt me if you get to various stages on this one. I'll just try and give you a little recap of basically what's happened. So essentially, our hearings took place in January to March. Prior to that, obviously, we were extremely busy, starting in about November all the way through Christmas and early stage of January, producing what's called matters and issues papers, which are very detailed responses to the examiner's questions, but they also make the basis of the discussion. So we asked some very probing questions, and which I'm glad to say the team all came together very well to produce those. And of course, those and everything else from the examinations still published online, so everything is publicly available, and I would encourage you to read them if you haven't already, but there's a lot of information in them. I would say the hearings were well attended by interested parties, so we had good attendance around the table. As part of our work for those hearings, we undertook quite a number of statements of common grounds as well. So we were able to reach positions with Historic England, who had raised some objections, mainly in relation to site policies and how they undertook mitigation in terms of historic assets or nearby historic assets. Historic England are also objecting around our approach to wind energy, and that's another thing I'll come to a bit later probably. But we also reached statements of common ground with Broadland District Council, who were objecting to the duty to cooperation levels, but we managed to reach agreement on that as well. Principally, much of the debate at the examination was focused around the timeline of the local plan. So what's submitted is from 2016. We're obviously some time from that. So the inspector was very much looking at when should the plan start? Should it be 2020? Should it be 22? Should it be 23? Each one of those, should it be 2024? Each one of those scenarios has to play out in the trajectory and the delivery of sites and the updates with permissions and completions. So it starts to get very complicated when you're starting to give different trajectories and scenarios. So he kept us busy on that one. Much debate about this, our deviation from the standard methodology in calculating the housing numbers. And we think we defended that very well, we hope. And there was also a requirement in the December NPPF that local plans now need to demonstrate a 5-year land supply and be examined on it. And if the inspector is satisfied, we no longer have to demonstrate it in the next 5 years, which is helpful. So he's gone down that route of not just taking the plan policies and projecting them in the future, but also looking at the position on the ground. Every time you grant permission or we grant permission for one of our allocations, it changes the plan and the trajectory. So he's gave us a lot of homework on that, because there's now a few allocations that have got permission. He also looked at the spatial strategy, numbers for distribution, small growth villages grabbed his attention. I'm going to second guess that he thought we could include more small villages within our spatial strategy. That was what he let slip. We don't know which ones, so I'll have to wait on his report. He wouldn't divulge more, but we did get questions on the methodology of selecting them and non-selected villages and why, quite a lot. Not because it was challenged from other third parties, but mainly his challenges. So we'll have to wait and see. As you'd expect, we got quizzed on nutrient neutrality. In detail, how each site was affected by it and the potential its mitigation, the timelines for that mitigation and the trajectory again of the plan. So he's looking at the soundness of the plan to deliver the numbers of the housing. And again, that was quite a lot of work behind the scenes to pull everything that's going on, which we're not necessarily involved in, around the nutrient neutrality schemes. And work with the developers, and Matt did a lot of work with going back to promoters. Are you going to do it on site? Are you waiting for credits? Is there a solution in the pipeline? So it was evolving. North Walsham, as I said, was scrutinised significantly by the inspector, almost like a planning appeal in the first place. I think that the depth of information he drove down into and required assurances from the promoters, from highways, but he also allowed significant input from those who were around the table objecting to the schemes. I'm afraid I can't remember their name, but there are various groups which were all around the table at the time, and they had a very fair hearing, and he's taken all that on board. We will just have to wait and see how he concludes. I would say we were backed up very well by County Council and some of the statutory providers, Anglian Water in particular support as well on our drive for water efficiency and the policy on standards within water, and if you like, their drive and the next stage of the water management plan. So I think the manager there came twice to our hearings and supported us on that one, which was very much appreciated. The outcome of all this, I guess, is that there's various modifications to the plan that we submitted that this committee's agreed to. There's various modifications that were put forward in the matters and issues and also discussed at the examination. So we've now consolidated all those modifications. We'll call them proposed modifications. and they are sitting with the inspector. What would happen is that once we've had his initial letter, he will turn his attention to those modifications, and there'll be a process of back and forth to agree them and narrow them down. Some of them should be absolutely just a tick in the box because we've talked about them and agreed them at examination or put forward already. Other ones will be related to discussions at the examination and his report. Little bit speculation here, so we're in a little bit of a limbo at the minute on that. In relation to his report, we were hoping to receive it just before the election. In fact, we were told it had been submitted to PIN, so it is ready as far as we know. But with the embargo, it was being held up. Speaking to the project officer this week, she says that embargo on letters is going to be lifted this week, and letters will start to be released. That's all I have. So we are back to the situation where we expect to receive his initial findings in the near future. I cannot get any other commitment out of them. But I will say we have sent a letter expressing our disappointment that it has taken so long. We did expect that initial letter far quicker, and we should have got it before July in normal process. But we don't want to aggravate the situation. We're told it's coming. I've got a few more little updates in planning in general, but if you have any questions on the local plan, I could probably take those now.
Councillor, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Looking at what the press are reporting about the government's latest proposals, it seems everybody's going to be required to have an up-to-date local plan with all the allocations in place. Does that, given where we are, we're ahead of the curve, I take it, so we are potentially immune from too many of the demands for building here, there and everywhere.
The new government is certainly a complication, but the rhetoric doesn't seem to have changed. Yeah, they're very keen on development. They still want local plans in place. So our plan was examined under transitional arrangements to the NPPF changes originally, so it was technically examined under the September version of the NPPF. Although the inspector did drag in that 5-year land supply business from a December 1, it's clear that the new government wish to update the NPPF, probably roll back on the December changes that the Conservative government did, which weakened that requirement for a housing target, and reinstate it as a must. But I don't expect it to roll back and change the entire methodology and so forth. And even if they did, I would hope that it was still the transitional arrangements, because the plan is so well advanced, or we would hope it wouldn't hold that up. But who has a crystal ball? We don't know. I mean, they have said they're going to reverse a lot of those December 2024 changes which the Conservatives brought in. But I would hope they don't fundamentally undermine the plan process, especially as their rhetoric is still continued that they want more growth and they want plans in place. I mean, the other ones, I suppose, were outlined in the King's speech yesterday, make reference to more decentralization and decision making and strategic planning, options for strategic planning is more local. I guess you'll get a letter on that at some point and find out what they mean. That's probably down the line. But they also propose to introduce a new planning and infrastructure bill, which I think is mainly looking at more national planning policy statements, and allowing those to be reviewed in a sort of 5-year cycle, which on the face of it makes sense, gives a bit more more certainty rather than tinkering around the edges, but you don't know what was going to be in them. But they've also said they're going to look at the nutrient neutrality, haven't they, and fund nature recovery, on a win-win outcome. But they still have to resolve it, and everything's quite well advanced now in terms of North Norfolk and how we're going to do that mitigation. So again, the detail will have to follow. But,
For supplementary, Chair, which brings me to the issue of wind farms.
yeah, I've
Do we
got that
need
on my
policy
list.
on that?
So you're obviously aware that I can't remember which Miliband. Was it Ed Miliband or the other one? I don't know. Well, one of our new ministers. So he written ministerial statement on onshore wind was issued on the 8th of July, which reverses the national policy, I'm going to say perceived national policy on the stoppage of onshore wind development. So that's come into effect already. It changes the NPPF, removing 2 of the tests that were already in place, which required the identification of suitable wind energy areas, and also where it had to be demonstrated that there would be community support or lack or no impacts on the local community. So those 2 have now gone. So it's seen as effectively removing the embargo on onshore wind farms. Those requirements are in our local plan policy. So I would expect the inspector will be now seeking some amendments, even though it's transitional. There are transitional arrangements. Our policy wouldn't necessarily align going forward with national policy, so there probably might have to be some work done there. And I briefly mentioned Historic England earlier. They objected to our wind energy policy and identification of areas in our local plan because it wasn't detailed enough, and we hadn't assessed the historic assets and their impact. So they wanted us to identify areas which would exclude the historic assets. Our argument was, well, that is far too minute for a strategic plan. We can't go out and assess every historic building and the visualization, especially when we don't know the size of turbines and everything. So we have continued to evolve the areas which are potentially suitable for wind farm development. We've taken into consideration parks and gardens, I think, and other environmental sides, and which has resulted in the exclusion of more areas and their graphical illustration as far as we can go on the proposals map. And that has partially been agreed with Historic England, and it's again is now with the inspector. So we will see. It's probably an emerging situation within our local plan, but as far as decisions making is concerned, national policy has now changed. So you may well find that we will get applications, but we are still aiming to identify on landscape grounds, environmental grounds, potential suitable areas, and the policy within the plan still requires the developers to adhere to certain criteria in development, but we might lose the public side.
Thank you, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We could speculate all morning, couldn't we?
We could.
My question relates to the major modifications which the inspector, I think, has indicated that he would be minded to accept, and I imagine that they will be confirmed in the letter that we are awaiting. But the essence of my question is, some, if not all of those major modifications will be the subject of further public consultation. When do you anticipate those consultations taking place?
Excellent. Yeah, we need first of all to wait for the initial letter from the inspector, which will highlight any areas of concern that he has with regard soundness, and also highlight any areas of further work that we need to do. So if he does indicate that he thinks that there should be further settlements in the small growth hierarchy, we will need to identify those. If he does identify, so the plan will go from, let's say, 2023 to 2040, something like that, that changes the trajectory. They will become main modifications. In essence, we've drafted some of those in advance, in anticipation, but they're by no means, it's in flow, if you like. So that we will first of all have to agree with him to do the work that he wants, which will result in a final schedule of modifications. Yeah, and you are right that the process would be that we would have to choose to consult on those modifications. We are technically still under examination, so we would consult on those, and it's highly likely that we would then have a further hearing session, maybe one day, I don't know how many they're going to be, for him to examine those before we get his final report. So it is the final report which will confirm everything, but there is a definite process to go through. And as soon as we have those initial proposed modifications finalized, we also have to go through the sustainability process and update that document. Have to undertake them through habitat regulations assessment as well. So there is a process to go through.
Thank you.
I understand the process. I'm just after your best guess as to when those major modifications may be consulted upon. Are we looking at the autumn of this year? Are we looking at the winter? Are we looking at next spring?
We are still hoping that this plan will get adopted this year. That is the timeline we are working to. We really can refine that estimate once we've got that letter and we understand the nature of the work that is required. A consultation would be minimum of 6 weeks within there. So it's looking quite fine, I should say, as we're halfway through the year. But it all depends on the depths of what he's going to go into in his letter. We would hope, you know, we argued that the plan is sound as submitted, but clearly he identified some issues during the examination. We shall see.
I think from the public point of view, they're not looking for a date. They're looking for, is it going to be this autumn? Is it going to be during the winter? Is it going to be in the spring? They're looking for that kind of timescale.
I would hope that we would get his letter fairly soon. We will undertake pieces of work and we should be able to come back to this committee, obviously, to agree such a consultation. And I would hope that that would take place later in this year, the other side of summer going into winter, subject to us getting that letter, let's say next week after. Yeah. So it's pretty much where our thinking.
Thank you, Mr. Yes, from the chair. So once you have received the letter, understood the letter, done some bargaining around the wording of the letter, right? Because I guess that's what will come to. You will then intend to bring it back to the board committee.
Yes, we'll update the committee on what it is and the extent of the work that is required. Obviously, we'll undertake that work and we'll seek guidance and your input on it before obviously it's finalised.
a recommendation here. But I thank Ian for his work on this and look forward to the amended letter and proposal.
Yep, the only other update I can give you is on 5-year land supply.
Okay, thank you very much. Ian.
Obviously, you all know we produce a 5-year land supply report annually. I can say it's emerging at the minute. The emerging calculation is showing that we still can't, well, won't be any surprise that we don't have a 5-year land supply. We're looking at about 4.28 years at the minute. But what I will say also is the December 2023 MPPF introduced an option of producing a 4-year land supply statement. So the government complicated it, and we could produce one of those had we got an advanced plan, had it gone through consultation and been submitted. Obviously, we fall into that category. So we've, following, I think, a few legal challenges on the definition of how you calculate a 4-year supply. I think that's all been resolved now. We've looked into whether we can demonstrate 4-year supply, and the emerging figures show that we won't be able to demonstrate that either. So we will be going forward where we are now, no change of position, that the presumption of sustainable development applies in decision making. We hope to finalize that report in the next few weeks, just checking the trajectories and the figures, but it's all based on the same trajectory that's in front of the inspector, with completions updated and so forth. The recent government may remove that 4-year requirement because it's a weakening, and it was in the December 2023 MPPF. But it's not going to make any difference to us at this stage. Once the local plan is adopted, though, of course, the situation changes. We do have 5-year land supplies. We do have 4-year land supplies. So that's the key document. And that's really it.
I don't think there are any other items on the agenda.
No, so it's just
Okay.
you to close the meeting, Chairman.
So unless you have any other points to raise, I propose that we close this meeting at 11:25. Thank you for your participation.